She is an Omega, David. A runt. The clan will not accept her, and neither will I. The elder's voice echoed in the cavernous stone hall. Cold and absolute. Lisa kept her eyes fixed on the gray slate floor, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. The moment she'd dreaded since her scent had shifted, marking her status. Rejection. Beside her, Alpha King David stood rigid. The air around him crackled with suppressed power, thick enough to choke on. He didn't look at the elder. He didn't look at his snarling pack. He turned, slowly, and locked his piercing, ice-blue eyes onto hers. The clan may reject her. David's voice was a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated through her boots. But she is mine. The pine needles dug into Lisa's palms as she scrubbed the last of the blood from the hunting knives. The icy water of the stream numbed her fingers, but the biting cold was a welcome distraction from the heavy, suffocating atmosphere back at the compound. 3 days had passed since the gathering. 3 days since she had presented as an Omega, the lowest rung on the werewolf hierarchy, practically a servant in the eyes of the Silver Moon clan. She wasn't supposed to be an Omega. Both her parents had been Betas, respected warriors who had died defending the territory borders when she was just a pup. The expectation had always been that she would follow in their footsteps. But fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Scrub harder, Lisa. If those aren't gleaming, Elder Marcus will have your hide. A voice sneered from the bank above. Lisa didn't need to look up to know it was Kara. Kara, the newly presented Beta, radiating smug superiority. They're clean, Lisa muttered, swishing the blades in the freezing water one last time before tossing them into the canvas satchel. Don't take that tone with me, runt, Kara snarled, dropping down the embankment. She shoved a heavy, iron cauldron toward Lisa. Cookhouse needs this scoured. Now. Lisa stared at the rusted monstrosity, the resentment burning hot in her chest. A week ago, she and Kara had been sparring partners. Now, she was less than a servant. She opened her mouth to protest, but a sudden shift in the wind made her snap her jaw shut. The scent hit her like a physical blow. Crisp winter air, crushed pine, and something dark, metallic, and undeniably powerful. Alpha King David. He rarely visited this part of the territory, usually keeping to the upper compound where the elders and elite warriors resided. But there he was, striding through the trees, his presence demanding absolute submission. Even Kara, for all her bluster, instantly dropped into a low crouch, exposing her neck in a sign of deep respect. Lisa hesitated a fraction of a second too long. Her knees hit the frozen ground just as David's shadow fell over her. He didn't speak. He just stood there, staring down at her bowed head. The silence stretched, agonizingly tense. The air crackled with that same suppressed energy she'd felt at the gathering. "Get up," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. Kara scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. But David wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Lisa. She stood slowly, keeping her eyes averted, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Leave us," David ordered, his gaze still fixed on Lisa. Kara hesitated, her confusion evident. "Alpha, the elders," I said. "Leave us." David's voice dropped an octave, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Kara practically scrambled up the embankment, disappearing into the trees without another word. Lisa stood alone with the Alpha King, the silence stretching between them. She dared a quick glance up and found his ice-blue eyes fixed intently on her, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He was massive, built like a tank, with broad shoulders and a chiseled jaw covered in dark stubble. He exuded power, a tangible force that made it hard to breathe. "They have you doing menial labor," he observed, his tone flat. "I am an Omega, Alpha," Lisa replied quietly, keeping her gaze firmly on his boots. "It is my place." "Is it?" he challenged, taking a slow step toward her. The scent of frost and ozone intensified, wrapping around her like a heavy blanket. Lisa fought the urge to step back. "The elders have decreed it so." "The elders," David sneered, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "They are fools bound by ancient, useless traditions." He reached out, his large hand wrapping around her upper arm. His grip was surprisingly gentle, yet firm enough that she knew she couldn't pull away. He stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, and lowered his head until his lips were inches from her ear. "You are not a servant, Lisa," he murmured, his breath hot against her skin. "And I am not finished with you." Before she could process his words, he released her and turned on his heel, striding back toward the upper compound without a backward glance. Lisa stood frozen by the stream, her mind reeling, her arms still tingling where he had touched her. What did he mean? Why was he paying attention to her, an outcast Omega? And more importantly, why did her wolf, dormant and subdued since the gathering, suddenly stir with a fierce, possessive energy at his touch? The questions buzzed in her head like a swarm of angry bees as she hoisted the heavy cauldron and began the long trek back to the cookhouse. The reality of her situation was clear. She was an outcast, rejected by her clan. But the Alpha King's words lingered, a dangerous spark of hope in the overwhelming darkness. He had claimed her in front of the elders, and now he was seeking her out. The game, it seemed, was far from over, and Lisa was terrifyingly unsure of the rules. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of clattering pots, snapping fire, and shouted orders. Lisa moved through the controlled madness like a ghost, head down, eyes focused on her tasks. The other Omegas gave her wide berth, their gazes filled with a mixture of pity and fear. She was the pariah, the one who had publicly drawn the Alpha's attention, and therefore the one who could bring his wrath down upon them all. "More flour, Lisa," barked Martha, the head cook, a grizzled woman who commanded the kitchen with an iron ladle. Lisa grabbed the heavy sack and lugged it toward the preparation tables, her muscles aching from the endless, grueling work. She dumped the flour into the massive wooden bowl, dust billowing up in a white cloud. As she worked, the whispers started. They always did. The Silver Moon clan thrived on gossip, and right now, she was the main course. Heard he almost challenged Elder Marcus. She must have used some kind of dark magic to snare him. An Omega as a mate? It's an abomination. Lisa gripped the edges of the bowl, her knuckles white. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the hateful words, but they seeped through, poisoning her thoughts. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't asked to be an Omega, and she certainly hadn't asked for the Alpha King to claim her. "Ignore them, child," Martha muttered, appearing beside her and aggressively stirring the flour. Wolves have small minds and big mouths, especially when they're scared. "Scared of what?" Lisa whispered, finally looking up. Martha paused, her pale eyes narrowing. "Scared of change. The old ways are comfortable, predictable. David, he represents a storm they can't control." Before Lisa could ask what she meant, a sudden, heavy silence fell over the kitchen. The clattering pots stopped, The shouting died away. Lisa turned slowly, her heart leaping into her throat. A warrior stood in the doorway. It was Silas, one of David's elite guard. He was imposing, heavily scarred, and radiated an aura of lethal competence. His gaze swept the room before locking onto Lisa. "The Alpha requests your presence," Silas rumbled, his voice devoid of any warmth. In his study, now, a collective gasp echoed through the kitchen. Martha's grip on the wooden spoon tightened. Lisa felt the blood drain from her face. Being summoned to the Alpha's study was unprecedented for an Omega. It was a space reserved for elders, elites, and high-ranking betas. "Clean yourself up," Martha hissed, tossing Lisa a slightly less stained apron. "And don't look him in the eye." Lisa hastily swapped aprons and followed Silas out of the kitchen, her legs feeling like lead. They walked in silence through the winding corridors of the compound, the air growing colder and the stone walls more imposing as they neared the Alpha's quarters. Silas stopped before a massive oak door, intricately carved with the crest of the Silver Moon clan. He knocked it twice, a sharp, authoritative sound. "Enter," David's voice commanded from within. Silas opened the door and stepped aside, gesturing for Lisa to go in. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling, and stepped over the threshold. The study was cavernous, lined with ancient books and maps. A fire roared in the massive hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. David stood by the window, his back to her, looking out over the snow-covered territory. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, sealing her in. "You requested me, Alpha?" Lisa managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. David turned slowly. He was out of his formal attire, wearing only dark trousers and a simple gray shirt that stretched taut across his broad chest. The casualness was jarring, making him seem even more dangerous. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward a leather chair opposite his heavy mahogany desk. Lisa hesitated, then quickly moved to the chair, sitting on the very edge, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She kept her eyes focused on the intricate pattern of the Persian rug. David didn't sit. He began to pace, his movements predatory, deliberate. The scent of frost and ozone filled the room, thick and intoxicating. "The elders are demanding I formalize my rejection of you," David said abruptly, his voice hard. "They want you exiled from the territory." Lisa felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. Exile meant certain death. An Omega alone in the wild wouldn't last a week. "I understand, Alpha," she whispered, fighting back tears. "I will gather my things." "Did I say I agreed with them?" David snapped, stopping his pacing to glare at her. Lisa blinked, confused. "But the clan, they won't accept." "I don't give a damn what the clan accepts," David growled, slamming his fist onto the desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "They do not dictate who I choose as my mate." Lisa flinched at the word. Mate. It felt too big, too dangerous to even think about. "But why me?" she finally blurted out, unable to hold back the question that had been tormenting her. "I'm an Omega. I have nothing to offer." David moved closer, leaning over the desk, his ice blue eyes blazing. "You offer exactly what I need, Lisa. You offer loyalty, strength, and a spirit that hasn't been broken by this clan's archaic rules." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. His touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. Her wolf howled, a primal sound of longing and recognition. "They think you are weak because of a label," David murmured, his voice softening. "But I see the fire in you. and I will not let them extinguish it. He straightened up, his expression hardening into an unyielding mask. The ceremony will take place tomorrow night. You will be presented as my mate to the entire clan. Lisa stared at him, stunned. Tomorrow. But they will riot. Let them, David said coldly. They need a reminder of who is in charge. And you, Lisa, will stand by my side. Dawn broke over the Silver Moon territory, not with warmth, but with a biting frost that coated the stone windows in jagged ice. Lisa hadn't slept. She had spent the night sitting on the lumpy mattress in the Omega barracks, her knees pulled to her chest, waiting for the heavy wooden door to burst open. She expected angry Betas, a mob led by Kara, or perhaps Elder Marcus himself coming to drag her to the frozen wastelands. Instead, it was Silas who arrived just as the morning bell tolled. He didn't knock. He simply filled the doorframe, his massive silhouette blocking the pale light of the hallway. The other Omegas in the room scrambled out of their bunks, pressing themselves against the far wall in absolute terror, their eyes downcast. "Come," Silas said. One word, heavy as a falling boulder. Lisa stood, smoothing her frayed woolen tunic. She didn't look back at the others. To look back was to invite their pity, and she needed every ounce of strength she possessed just to put one foot in front of the other. Silas led her away from the subterranean kitchens and the damp, earth-scented lower levels. They climbed winding stone staircases, passing tapestries that depicted the violent, glorious history of the Silver Moon clan. With every step upward, the air grew warmer, infused with the scent of burning cedar and expensive waxes. They were entering the Alpha Wing, a place Lisa had only seen from the courtyard below. Silas stopped before a set of double doors carved from white ash. He pushed them open and stepped aside. "The seamstresses are waiting," he grunted, before pulling the doors shut behind her. Lisa stood frozen in the center of a room larger than the entire Omega barracks. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling glass, illuminating plush furs, a massive four-poster bed, and a vanity overflowing with crystal vials. "Well, don't just track dirt onto the rugs. Strip." Lisa flinched. 3 women stood near the bed, their arms draped in yards of shimmering black and silver fabric. The speaker, an older Beta with a severe face and tightly coiled hair, looked at Lisa as if she were a dead rodent dragged in by the hounds. "I am Beatrice," the woman snapped, stepping forward. "The Alpha King has ordered us to make you presentable for tonight. A fool's errand, but we obey the king." For the next 4 hours, Lisa was scrubbed raw in a steaming copper tub, her hair aggressively detangled and her skin anointed with fragrant oils that felt suffocatingly heavy. Beatrice and her assistants worked in harsh, resentful silence, their sharp nails occasionally digging a fraction too deep into Lisa's scalp or shoulders. Lisa endured it, her jaw locked. She was an Omega. She was accustomed to pain. But something was shifting beneath her ribs, a low, vibrating hum of anger. The submission that had been beaten into her over the past week was fracturing. "Stand still, runt," one of the younger attendants hissed, yanking the laces of the heavy silken undercorset. "If you pull any tighter, I will bruise," Lisa said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. The attendant scoffed. "And who cares if an Omega bruises?" Lisa turned her head, meeting the girl's eyes in the mirror. "The Alpha King," Lisa replied evenly. "Do you want to explain to him why his mate is bleeding before the ceremony has even begun?" The attendant paled, instantly loosening the strings. Beatrice shot Lisa a dark, calculating look, but said nothing. The dynamic had shifted, just a fraction. but it was enough to make Lisa's heart hammer with a terrifying thrill. As they draped the final layer of the ceremonial gown, a waterfall of midnight silk that seemed to absorb the light in the room. Lisa was left alone to let the fabric settle. The attendants retreated to the adjoining antechamber. Through the crack in the heavy oak door, Lisa's newly sharpened hearing picked up the hushed, urgent voices in the hall. "It's madness," a raspy voice whispered. "Elder Marcus, if he marks her, the treaty with the Northern Fangs is void. They demanded a Luna of noble blood, not a defective stray. We cannot stop the ceremony, Elder," a deeper voice replied. "David's elite guard have secured the perimeter. Silas would gut us before we reach the dais." "There are other ways," Marcus hissed, his tone dripping with venom. "Her parents were traitors. If the king knew what her father actually found at the border before he died, if he knew the anomaly in her bloodline, he would kill her himself." Lisa stopped breathing. Her hands gripped the edge of the vanity, her knuckles turning white. Traitors? Her parents were heroes. They had died protecting the pack. What anomaly? Before she could process the horrific revelation, the heavy doors to the suite swung open. David stood in the threshold. He wore the traditional ceremonial garb of the Alpha King, a mantle of obsidian wolf fur over a tunic of spun silver, his chest bare beneath the heavy chains of his office. He looked like a god of war, terrifying and magnificent. He dismissed the attendants in the antechamber with a flick of his wrist. He stepped into the room, his ice-blue eyes locking onto Lisa. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken questions. Lisa's mind raced with Marcus's words. But as David stepped closer, the scent of frost and ozone completely overwhelmed her senses. "You are shaking," David noted, his voice a low rumble. He stopped a foot away, his massive presence entirely eclipsing the sunlight from the window. "It is a heavy dress, Alpha," Lisa lied, staring at the silver chains on his chest. David reached out, his knuckle gently lifting her chin until she was forced to look into his eyes. "Do not lie to me, Lisa. Never lie to me. I am terrified," she breathed, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. "The clan will tear me apart. They say I will start a war." David's jaw clenched. "Let the war come. The Northern Fangs are cowards who have held this pack hostage with a fragile peace for too long. If they want blood, I will drown them in it." He traced her cheekbone, his touch contrasting violently with his brutal words. "You are not just a mate, Lisa. You are the spark that will burn this stagnant clan to the ground so we can rebuild. Tonight, you do not bow. You do not lower your eyes. Do you understand?" Lisa swallowed hard, the ghost of her father's secret whispering in her mind. She nodded. "I understand." David's eyes flared with a sudden, possessive heat. He dropped his hand and offered her his arm. "Then let us go face the wolves." The great courtyard was an amphitheater of stone and fire. Massive iron cauldrons blazed with roaring flames, casting long, erratic shadows against the sheer cliff faces that enclosed the Silver Moon stronghold. As the massive oak doors of the Alpha Wing swung open, the roar of the clan hit Lisa like a physical blow. It wasn't a cheer. It was a chaotic, guttural symphony of snarls, murmurs, and hostile howling. Over 1,000 wolves were packed into the courtyard, their eyes gleaming in the firelight, all fixed on the balcony where Lisa and David now stood. The sheer weight of their collective animosity made Lisa's knees buckle. And Omega was biologically wired to submit to the pack's aggression. Her inner wolf whimpered, demanding she drop to the stone floor and bare her throat. She swayed, but David's arm was a band of iron around her waist. He didn't just hold her up. He projected his aura outward, a suffocating wave of dominant alpha energy that crashed over the crowd. The snarling died instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, choked, and resentful. "Walk," David murmured against her ear. They descended the grand stone staircase, step by agonizing step. The crowd parted for them, though the wolves at the front edges bared their teeth, their lips curled in disgust. Lisa saw Kara in the front row, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Lisa kept her chin up. She focused on the ceremonial altar at the center of the courtyard, a massive slab of black granite where the moon priestess stood waiting, holding a silver chalice. As they reached the altar, the crowd closed in behind them, a suffocating ring of fur and fangs. The moon priestess, an ancient woman with blind, milky eyes, raised her hands. "We gather under the watchful eye of the moon goddess to witness the bonding of our Alpha King. I challenge this union," the voice echoed off the stone walls, sharp and desperate. Elder Marcus stepped out from the inner circle, flanked by two elite warriors who looked deeply uncomfortable but duty-bound to protect the elder. David didn't turn around immediately. He kept his eyes on the priestess, his jaw tight. Slowly, he pivoted, his cape sweeping the stone floor. "You interrupt a sacred rite, Marcus." David's voice was dangerously quiet, carrying easily through the absolute silence of the courtyard. "I protect this clan from ruin," Marcus shouted, banging his wooden staff against the ground. He pointed a trembling, bony finger at Lisa. "She is an Omega, a runt. Taking her as your Luna breaks the ancient accords with the Northern Fangs. You invite slaughter upon our pups and our elders for a servant." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The tension in the air spiked, thick and combustible. "The Northern Fangs," David said, taking a slow, predatory step away from the altar, "have dictated the lives of my people since my father's reign. They demand tribute, they demand our lands, and now they demand my bed." David swept his gaze over the crowd, his eyes glowing with an ethereal, terrifying blue light. "I am the Alpha King. I do not bow to treaties written in cowardice, and I do not let decaying old men tell me who belongs at my side." He lunged. It happened so fast, Lisa barely registered the movement. In a blur of motion, David crossed the distance, grabbed Elder Marcus by the throat, and lifted the old man entirely off the ground. The two elite guards instinctively reached for their weapons, but a single lethal snarl from David froze them in place. "Speak against my mate again," David whispered, his voice echoing in the dead silence, "and I will tear your tongue from your skull." He tossed Marcus to the ground like a discarded rag. The elder gasped for air, clutching his bruised throat. David turned his back on the gasping man, striding back to Lisa. His chest heaved, his fangs slightly elongated. He looked wild, dangerous, and completely, utterly focused on her. "Proceed," David ordered the priestess, his voice cracking like a whip. The priestess, trembling slightly, dipped 2 fingers into the silver chalice, drawing out an ancient, rust-colored paste. She reached out and marked Lisa's forehead, then David's. "Blood of the earth, light of the moon," she chanted it, her voice returning to its mystical cadence. "Bind these souls as one. Let the Alpha claim his equal." Equal. The word drew a collective scoff from the crowd, but David ignored them. He turned to Lisa, his eyes softening just a fraction, a private look meant only for her. "Brace yourself," he whispered. He leaned in, his lips brushing the sensitive skin where her neck met her shoulder. Lisa gasped at the searing heat of his mouth. Then his fangs extended, and he bit down. Pain flared, sharp and blinding, instantly followed by a rush of heat that felt like liquid fire pouring directly into her veins. It wasn't just a physical sensation. It was a soul-deep collision. David's mind, vast, cold, and ancient, crashed into hers. But as his venom mixed with her blood, something deep inside Lisa, something locked away since childhood, shattered. Her dormant wolf didn't just whimper in submission. It roared. A shockwave of sheer, concussive energy exploded outward from Lisa's body. The blast of invisible force swept through the courtyard. The cauldrons flared violently, the flames turning blindingly white. The front rows of the crowd, including Kara and the recovering Elder Marcus, were physically knocked backward onto the stone floor. The moon priestess shrieked, dropping the chalice as she was thrown against the granite altar. David tore his fangs away, staggering back half a step, his eyes wide with profound shock. Lisa stood trembling at the altar, untouched by the blast. She opened her eyes, and a collective gasp of pure horror echoed through the great courtyard. Her eyes, usually a soft, unremarkable brown, were glowing with a radiant, piercing gold. Not the blue of an alpha, not the amber of a beta. Gold. The color of legends. The color of a myth the Silver Moon clan had spent a century trying to bury. The silence in the great courtyard was absolute. It was a suffocating, terrifying stillness. The kind that precedes a catastrophic storm. The blazing cauldrons seemed to dim in comparison to the radiant, unearthly golden light spilling from Lisa's eyes. An omega with golden eyes. It wasn't just rare. It was considered an impossibility. A myth whispered by the elders to scare pups about the legendary lichens, the ancient progenitors of all werewolf kind. They were supposed to be extinct, wiped out centuries ago in a bloody purge. Yet, here she stood. The moon priestess scrambled backward on her hands and knees, her sightless eyes wide as if she could perceive the golden aura radiating from the altar. The prophecy. She wheezed, her voice a reedy whisper that cut through the silence. The blood of the ancients wakes. Elder Marcus, still clutching his bruised throat on the stone floor, stared at Lisa with a mixture of pure terror and frantic, calculating hatred. David, however, did not move away. He stepped back toward her, his own ice-blue eyes fixed on the golden glow. His expression was unreadable, a mask of tightly controlled power. He reached out and, with deliberate slowness, cupped her cheek. The moment his skin touched hers, the concussive energy vanished. The golden light faded from her eyes, retreating back to their familiar, soft brown. Lisa gasped, collapsing forward. David caught her effortlessly, hauling her against his chest. She was trembling violently, her skin freezing cold despite the heat of the ceremonial fires. What happened to me? She whispered into his tunic, her voice trembling. The roaring of her inner wolf had subsided to an exhausted, confused whimper. "You are safe," David murmured, his voice a low rumble vibrating against her ear. It was a statement, an order, and a promise all at once. He turned to face the clan. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a dangerous, chaotic murmuring. This was no longer just an insulting mating. It was a perceived threat to their very existence. "She is an abomination," a voice yelled from the back of the crowd. "A lichen! The old texts say they bring ruin!" Another cried. The chaotic snarling returned, louder and more desperate than before. The ring of wolves surrounding the altar began to press closer, driven by a primal, panicked instinct to eliminate the anomaly. David didn't shout. He didn't issue a command. He simply released his aura again, but this time, it was not just dominance. It was pure, unadulterated violence. The scent of ozone and frost intensified until it was choking. The temperature in the courtyard plummeted, frost actually creeping up the black granite of the altar. The front line of wolves staggered back, whining and clutching their chests as the pressure of the Alpha King's fury bore down on them. "She is your Luna," David stated, his voice echoing off the stone walls with terrifying clarity. "Any wolf who speaks against her, any wolf who looks at her with anything less than absolute submission, will answer to my claws. The ceremony is concluded." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and carried Lisa up the grand staircase, his strides long and purposeful. Silas and the elite guard immediately formed a protective wedge behind them, shielding their retreat into the Alpha Wing. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, cutting off the chaotic din of the courtyard. But the tension inside the Alpha Suite was equally suffocating. David set her gently on the edge of the massive four-poster bed. He didn't speak. He paced the length of the room, his movements restless and agitated. Lisa watched him, her mind spinning. "You knew," she realized, the words slipping out as a hoarse whisper. "You knew what I was." David stopped pacing. He turned to her, his jaw set. "I suspected. Your father, before he died at this border. He didn't just die defending the territory. He was murdered by the Northern Fangs because he discovered a lichen ruin hidden in their territory. He sent me a message before he was ambushed." Lisa's breath hitched. "A ruin? But what does that have to do with me?" "Your mother was with him," David explained, his voice softening slightly. "She was pregnant with you. The ruin contained an ancient wellspring of lichen energy. Your father believed the exposure altered your mother, and by extension, you. And the elders knew? They knew the circumstances of your parents' deaths," David replied bitterly. "They knew the Northern Fangs were terrified of something your father found. But they didn't know about the lichen bloodline. If they had, they would have killed you the day you were born to preserve the peace." "But I presented as an Omega," Lisa argued, clutching the heavy silk of her gown. "How could a lichen be an Omega?" David moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed beside her. "The lichen gene was dormant, suppressed by your body to keep you alive. It labeled you an Omega because that was the safest place for you to hide. Unnoticed, unimportant. My bite, my venom, it broke the suppression." He reached out, his hand gently resting over her racing heart. "You are not a runt, Lisa. You are the rightful heir to a power this clan hasn't seen in centuries." Lisa looked at his hand, then up into his intense blue eyes. "And that's why you chose me? For power?" David's expression tightened. He pulled his hand away, standing up. "I chose you because I refuse to let the Northern Fangs dictate our future. I chose you because I saw the fire in your eyes when you were scrubbing knives by the river, refusing to be broken. The lichen blood is an asset, yes, but it is not why you are my mate." Before she could process his words, a frantic knocking echoed from the heavy oak doors. "Alpha!" Silas's voice called out, tight with urgency. "The Northern Fangs. Their emissary has just arrived at the gates. They have heard of this ceremony." David's eyes darkened, a storm brewing in the icy depths. He looked back at Lisa, his expression unreadable. "Rest," he commanded gently. "The war has begun. The morning light filtering into the Alpha suite was the color of bruised iron. Lisa had barely slept. The luxurious bed felt like a trap, the heavy furs suffocating. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, wrapped in a thick woolen robe, watching the snow fall over the courtyard. Below, the stronghold was a hive of frantic activity. The usual morning drills were replaced by hurried preparations. Blacksmiths stoked their forges, the rhythmic clang of hammers echoing through the valley. Elite warriors barked orders, organizing patrols and fortifying the massive wooden gates. The Northern Fangs had not brought an army, not yet. But the arrival of their emissary in the dead of night was a clear declaration of intent. The heavy door to the suite opened behind her. Lisa flinched, her newly awakened senses instantly recognizing the approaching footsteps. It was Silas. "The Alpha requests your presence in the war room, Luna," Silas said, offering a stiff, awkward bow. The title felt strange on his tongue, but his deference was genuine. The golden eyes had terrified the clan, but they had earned the wary respect of the elite guard. Lisa turned, tightening the sash of her robe. "Lead the way." The war room was located in the deepest part of the stronghold, a circular chamber carved directly into the mountain rock. A massive table dominated the center, covered in maps and wooden markers. When Lisa entered, the air in the room was thick with tension. David stood at the head of the table, flanked by Silas and two other imposing commanders. Opposite him sat Elder Marcus, his neck heavily bandaged, his face a mask of sour resentment. But it was the man standing at the far end of the table who drew Lisa's immediate attention. He was tall and gaunt, wrapped in furs the color of dirty ash. His skin was pale, and his eyes were a sickly, jaundiced yellow. He exuded an odor of decay and stale blood. This was the emissary of the Northern Fangs. The emissary's yellow eyes snapped to Lisa as she entered. A sneer curled his thin lips. "So the rumors are true. The great Alpha King David has chosen a stray." David didn't blink. He extended a hand toward the empty chair beside him. "Sit, Lisa." She walked carefully around the table, ignoring the emissary's gaze and the hateful glare of Elder Marcus, and took the seat beside David. The proximity to his sheer, dominating presence was the only thing keeping her hands from shaking. "You bring demands, Kale," David said, addressing the emissary. His voice was dangerously calm. "State them and leave." Kale smirked, leaning forward, resting his bony hands on the map table. "Our demands have not changed, David. The treaty dictates that you marry a female of noble lineage, approved by our Alpha. You have broken the accord." "The accord was signed by my father under duress," David replied coldly. "It is void." "My Alpha does not agree," Kale hissed. "He considers this an act of war. However, he is merciful. He offers you a choice to avoid the slaughter of your people." Kale's yellow eyes flicked to Lisa, filled with malicious intent. "Hand over the Omega. Allow us to execute her for insulting the treaty. Do this, and take the bride we have chosen for you, and the peace remains." Lisa stopped breathing. The room seemed to tilt. "Execute her." Elder Marcus slammed his fist on the table. "It is the only logical choice. We cannot fight the Fangs. We trade one worthless life to save thousands." "Silence," David commanded, not raising his voice. But the word carried the weight of a physical blow. Marcus clamped his mouth shut, though his eyes burned with fury. David looked at Kale, his expression unreadable. "And if I refuse?" "Then we will burn the Silver Moon territory to ash." Kale promised, his voice a raspy whisper. We will slaughter your warriors, enslave your pups, and mount your head on our gates. The silence in the war room was deafening. Lisa looked at David, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs. She was the reason for this. She was the spark that would ignite a war. You are an Omega, her inner voice whispered, the years of conditioning rising up. You are expendable. Submit. But as she looked at David's strong profile, she felt that strange, vibrating heat in her chest again. The golden energy. It pushed back against the fear. She wasn't just an Omega anymore. She was a Lycan. And she was his mate. David slowly leaned forward, planting his hands on the table, mirroring Kale's posture. Tell your alpha, David said, his voice dropping to a terrifying guttural growl, that the Silver Moon clan no longer bows to threats. Tell him that if he wants my Luna, he will have to pry her from my cold, dead hands. And tell him, David's ice-blue eyes flared, glowing with lethal intent, that the Lycans have returned. Kale's arrogant sneer vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine, visceral panic. The color drained from his pale face. You lie, Kyle stammered, stepping back from the table. David stood up, his massive frame dominating the room. Run back to your master, Kale. Tell him to prepare for war. The heavy oak doors of the war room slammed shut behind the retreating emissary, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel. The silence left in Kale's wake was thick, suffocating, and terrifyingly fragile. Elder Marcus was the first to break it. He slumped back into his chair, his face entirely drained of color. You have doomed us all, David. The fangs will march before the moon is full. We do not have the numbers. We have the high ground, the walls, and the winter, David replied, his voice a flat, uncompromising calm. He turned his attention back to the map table, sliding wooden markers representing troop movements across the parchment. Silas, double the patrols on the northern ridge. I want archers on the battlements round the clock. If a single snowflake falls out of place, I want to know about it. Yes, Alpha, Silas rumbled, his hand resting instinctively on the hilt of his broadsword. Lisa sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. The golden fire that had surged through her veins earlier had retreated to a dull, aching throb at the base of her skull. She felt raw, hyper-aware. She could hear the frantic heartbeats of the men in the room, smell the bitter tang of Marcus's fear, and feel the cold, heavy weight of David's immense burden. She was the catalyst for this war. A girl who, just yesterday, was scrubbing rusted pots in the kitchens. David dismissed the commanders with a curt nod. Marcus lingered, his eyes darting toward Lisa with a mixture of revulsion and awe. Before he too turned and swept out of the room, muttering under his breath, when the heavy doors clicked shut, leaving them alone, the oppressive alpha aura David had been projecting suddenly vanished. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. He leaned his hands on the edge of the map table, hanging his head. For the first time since she had met him, he looked exhausted. Lisa stood up slowly. She walked around the table and stopped beside him. Without overthinking it, she reached out and placed her hand over his. His skin was freezing, a stark contrast to the burning heat pooling in her own chest. David went still at her touch, then slowly turned his hand over, tangling his fingers with hers. His grip was almost desperate. I am a weapon to them, Lisa whispered, staring at the map. To the northern fangs, to Marcus, and to you? David closed his eyes, a muscle feathering in his jaw. When he opened them, the icy blue was soft, vulnerable. I am a king, Lisa, I have to think of my people. The lichen blood is a weapon, yes. A deterrent that could save thousands of lives. He paused, stepping closer until his chest brushed her shoulder. But the woman who holds that blood, she is my mate. I would have torn Marcus's throat out on that altar, even if your eyes had remained brown. I claimed you because of your spirit, not your genetics. Lisa looked up at him, searching his face for deceit and finding none. But I don't know how to control it. The gold, it just happened. What if I can't do it again? What if they attack and I am just an Omega? You are not an Omega, David said fiercely, cupping her face with his free hand. His thumb stroked her cheekbone. The lichen energy is tied to your emotions, to the bond we share. It will answer when you need it most. Until then, you are under my protection. A sudden, sharp blast of a horn shattered the quiet intimacy of the room. It was a single, long, agonizing note that reverberated through the stone floor. The warning horn. David's head snapped toward the door, his eyes flashing a brilliant, lethal blue. The exhaustion vanished, instantly replaced by the terrifying presence of the Alpha King. They didn't wait, David snarled, his fangs extending slightly. He grabbed Lisa's hand and pulled her toward the door. As they burst out into the corridor, chaos had already descended upon the Alpha Wing. Warriors were sprinting down the halls, buckling on armor and shouting orders. Silas met them at the top of the grand staircase, his face grim. Alpha, it's not the main army. It's a vanguard. Maybe 200 wolves. They've breached the outer perimeter at the river. They're testing our response time, David deduced rapidly. He turned to Lisa, his expression hardening into stone. Silas will take you to the crypts. It is the safest place in the stronghold. Do not come out until I come for you. David, no. Lisa protested, her heart hammering against her ribs. I can't hide in the dark while the pack bleeds because of me. You will do as I command, Luna, David roared, his alpha tone hitting her like a physical shockwave. It wasn't meant to harm her, but to compel her, a primal order driven by his frantic need to keep her safe. He didn't wait for her to argue. He turned and threw himself down the stairs, shifting mid-stride. By the time he hit the landing, the Alpha King was gone, replaced by a monstrous, towering black wolf that let out a deafening howl before charging out into the snow. The crypts beneath the Silver Moon stronghold were ancient, damp, and smelled of disturbed dust and old bone. It was a vast network of tunnels where the honored dead were interred, doubling as a bunker during sieges. Lisa huddled on a stone bench, surrounded by the terrified whimpers of pups and the anxious pacing of the Omegas and elderly wolves. The heavy iron door at the top of the stairs had been barred from the outside, leaving them entombed in semi-darkness, lit only by a few sputtering torches. Above them, the muted thud of combat echoed through the stone ceiling. Every vibration sent a fresh wave of panic through the huddled masses. Martha, the head cook, sat beside Lisa, clutching a rusty meat cleaver. He'll hold them, the older woman muttered, rocking slightly. The king is strong. He'll hold them. Lisa wasn't so sure. She felt restless, her skin prickling with an unnatural heat. Her newly awakened senses were overwhelmed by the suffocating smell of fear in the room. But beneath the fear, she caught another scent. Iron, sweat, and something foul. Deceit. Lisa stood up, her eyes narrowing as she peered into the gloom toward the back of the crypts. There was a secondary egress point there. An old smuggling tunnel that led out to the lower cliffs. It was supposed to be sealed with a solid rock wall. "Did you hear that?" Kara whispered. The beta girl was huddled a few feet away, her previous arrogance entirely stripped away, leaving only a terrified teenager holding a crying pup. "Hear what?" Martha asked, gripping her cleaver tighter. A grinding sound echoed from the darkness. Stone moving against stone. Lisa didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, moving away from the safety of the group. "Stay back," she ordered, her voice surprisingly steady. She walked down the long corridor of stone sarcophagi. The shadows seemed to dance mockingly around her. As she rounded the final corner toward the tunnel entrance, she froze. The stone wall had been rolled back. Standing in the entrance, illuminated by a single torch, was Elder Marcus. He was whispering to a hulking, battle-scarred wolf bearing the gray and white markings of the northern fangs. Behind the Fang warrior, half a dozen more filed silently into the crypt. "Quickly," Marcus hissed, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and treacherous ambition. "The pups and the Omegas are in the main chamber. The girl is with them. Kill her, and Alpha Kale will honor our agreement." Lisa's blood ran cold. He was selling them out. He was letting enemy assassins into the bunker to butcher the defenseless, just to eliminate her and save his own skin. One of the Fang assassins sniffed the air, his yellow eyes locking onto Lisa in the shadows. He growled, drawing a jagged iron blade. "There she is," the assassin sneered. Marcus turned, spotting Lisa. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across his wrinkled face. "The little runt. Did you really think you could play Luna? You've destroyed this clan. Now, you pay the price." The assassins charged, their heavy boots thudding against the stone floor. Lisa didn't scream. She didn't run. The fear that had gripped her all her life, the paralyzing Omega submission, evaporated, burned away by a sudden, volcanic surge of absolute fury. They were going to kill the pups. Her heart hammered a frantic, ancient rhythm. The air around her suddenly plummeted in temperature, frost blooming across the stone sarcophagi. "No," Lisa whispered. The word wasn't loud, but it carried a strange, dual resonance, as if a second, much older voice had spoken over hers. As the lead assassin lunged, raising his blade to strike her down, Lisa looked up. The sputtering torches flared violently, bathing the crypt in a blinding, radiant light. Lisa's eyes were no longer brown. They burned like twin miniature suns, a terrifying, unearthly gold. The Lycan energy didn't just ripple this time. It exploded. A concussive shockwave of pure, golden kinetic force blasted down the corridor. It hit the charging assassins like a freight train. The sound of snapping bones echoed sickeningly as all 6 heavily armed warriors were thrown backward, smashing into the stone walls and crumpling to the floor, unconscious or dead. Elder Marcus, caught on the edge of the blast, was thrown off his feet, hitting the ground hard. Lisa stood amidst the swirling dust, her chest heaving, the golden light slowly fading from her eyes to leave them glowing with a soft, residual luminescence. She walked slowly toward the groaning elder, her presence exuding a terrifying, crushing dominance that had absolutely nothing to do with David. It was entirely her own. Behind her, the Omegas and pups had crept out of the main chamber, witnessing the impossible. Kara stood at the front, her mouth agape, the crying pup forgotten in her arms. Marcus looked up at Lisa, sheer, unfiltered terror contorting his face. He scrambled backward until his back hit the cold stone wall. "You," Marcus stammered, his eyes wide. "I am the Luna of the Silver Moon," Lisa said, her voice echoing with commanding authority. "And you are a traitor." She didn't touch him. She didn't need to. The sheer weight of her aura forced the elder to his knees, his head bowing against his will, finally submitting to the power he had tried so desperately to destroy. Elder Marcus remained on his knees, his forehead pressed against the freezing stone of the crypt floor. He was sobbing, a pathetic, broken sound that echoed in the vast chamber. The oppressive, golden aura radiating from Lisa held him pinned like an insect under glass. She looked down at the man who had tormented her, who had willingly opened their gates to murderers just to maintain his own fragile grip on the clan's traditions. A week ago, she would have cowered before him. Now, she felt only a cold, clinical pity. "I could kill you," Lisa said, her voice echoing with that strange, dual resonance. "It would be easy. A flick of my wrist and your neck would snap like dry kindling." Marcus whined, sound of absolute terror-stricken submission. "But I am not a monster," Lisa continued, stepping back, the golden glow in her eyes dimming to a manageable ember. The crushing pressure in the room lifted instantly. "And I am not the Alpha. Your judgment belongs to the king." Before Marcus could even raise his head, a deafening crash reverberated from the top of the stairwell. The heavy iron bars securing the crypt door screamed as they were violently wrenched from the stone. The heavy door flew open, smashing against the wall. A massive, midnight black wolf plummeted down the stairs, its fur matted with snow and dark, glistening blood. It hit the landing and shifted in a blur of bone and muscle. David stood there, his chest heaving, his silver tunic torn and stained. His ice-blue eyes were wild, frantic, scanning the gloom. The scent of ozone, pines, and fresh blood flooded the crypt. He saw the broken bodies of the Fang assassins. He saw Marcus groveling on the floor. And then, his eyes locked onto Lisa, he crossed the room in 3 massive strides, ignoring the elder entirely. He grabbed Lisa by the shoulders, his hands trembling violently. He searched her face, checking her arms, her neck, his thumbs wiping away a streak of dirt from her cheek. "Are you hurt?" David rasped, his voice ragged, bordering on a feral growl. "Did they touch you?" "I'm untouched," Lisa whispered, the last of the lichen adrenaline fading, leaving her suddenly exhausted. She leaned into his chest, inhaling the scent of frost that always grounded her. "I protected them, David. The pups. I couldn't just hide." David wrapped his arms around her, pulling her flush against his armored chest, burying his face in her hair. He let out a long, shuddering breath. "I felt it. Even at the river, I felt the shift in the air. The golden echo." He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes, his expression a mix of profound relief and overwhelming pride. "You didn't just protect them, Lisa. You conquered." David finally turned his attention to Marcus. The Alpha King's aura flared, not with the radiant heat of a lichen, but with the freezing, brutal dominance of a ruler betrayed. "Silas!" David roared. The hulking commander hurried down the stairs, flanked by 4 elite guards. They stopped short at the sight of the massacred assassins and the cowering elder. "Treason," David stated coldly, pointing at Marcus. He opened the smuggling tunnels. "Take him to the holding cells. He will face the full pack at dawn." As the guards dragged the sobbing elder away, David turned back to the huddled masses emerging from the main chamber. The Omegas, the elderly, and the pups stared at Lisa in absolute silence. Kara stepped forward. The beta girl was trembling, her face pale, the arrogance that had defined her entirely burned away. She looked at the dead assassins, then at Lisa. Slowly, deliberately, Kara dropped to her knees. She bowed her head, exposing her neck in the ultimate gesture of submission and respect. "Thank you, Luna," Kara whispered, her voice cracking. One by one, the rest of the Omegas followed suit. Then Martha, then the elderly wolves. The entire crypt knelt before the girl they had mocked just 24 hours prior. David watched them, a fierce, triumphant smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. He offered Lisa his hand. "Come," he said softly. "The vanguard is broken. The stronghold is secure. It is time the rest of the clan saw their queen." They walked out of the crypt and ascended the winding stairs, emerging into the great courtyard just as the first rays of dawn broke over the eastern peaks. The sky was bleeding crimson and gold, mirroring the violence and the victory of the night. The courtyard was filled with exhausted, bloodied warriors. The snow was heavily trampled and stained, but the gates held fast. As David and Lisa stepped out onto the Alpha's balcony, a hush fell over the exhausted army. Word had already spread from the crypts. The whispers were no longer of a defective Omega, but of a golden-eyed savior. David stepped to the edge of the balcony, his booming voice washing over the clan. "The Northern Fangs sought to test us in the dark. They sought to use our own traditions against us. But they found only death." He reached out, taking Lisa's hand and pulling her forward until she stood shoulder to shoulder with him. The morning light caught the residual golden flecks in her brown eyes. "You question my choice," David called out, his voice echoing off the mountains. "You called her a runt, a stray. But the moon goddess does not make mistakes. She gave us exactly what we needed to survive the coming storm." David raised Lisa's hand high into the air. "Behold your Luna, the last Lycan, the queen of the silver moon." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the winter wind howling through the courtyard. And then, a single wolf threw back its head and howled. It was a sound of reverence, of awe, and of newfound hope. Another wolf joined in, then another. Within seconds, the entire Silver Moon clan was howling at the breaking dawn, a deafening, unified chorus that shook the very foundations of the stronghold. Lisa looked out over the sea of wolves, feeling the raw, vibrating power of their loyalty washing over her. She was no longer an outcast. She was the anchor this pack so desperately needed. She turned to look at David. He was watching her, his icy blue eyes filled with an intensity that took her breath away. The war with the Northern Fangs was only just beginning. Alpha Kale would return with an army, bringing fire and ruin to their doorstep. But as David pulled her close, kissing her deeply amidst the roar of their people, Lisa knew they would not face the darkness alone. Fate had tried to break her, the clan had tried to reject her, but the Alpha had chosen her. And she, the Omega-turned-Lycan queen, would burn the world to the ground to keep him safe. The echoing howls of the Silver Moon clan marked the end of Lisa's beginning, but the true war against the Northern Fangs still looms on the horizon. From a rejected Omega scrubbing pots in the freezing river to the awakened Lycan queen standing proudly beside her Alpha, Lisa's journey proves that true power isn't dictated by bloodline or status. It's forged in the fires of adversity and unconditional love. Chosen by fate, rejected by Alpha, is a testament to trusting your inner strength when the world tells you to submit. If you felt the chill of the frost and the heat of the golden echo in this story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more intense cinematic audiobooks and dramatic fiction. Let us know in the comments what you think Alpha Kale's next move will be.